During the live show on Zach Millen Talks Live, I often get asked the question, what are some of my favorite guilty pleasure movies? Well, I've searched the internet, I've looked at lists, I've made up my own, and I'm about to give you some answers. In no particular order, here are some of my biggest guilty pleasure movies. The only rule I set for myself is all these movies had to be on Rotten Tomatoes in order to make the list, to keep the consistency flowing. So without further ado, let's bring in my first entry. And the first entry for my biggest guilty pleasure is going to be Mike Myers' The Cat in the Hat, with a 10% on Rotten Tomatoes critically and a 57% audience score. The critics said that The Cat in the Hat was filled with double entendres and potty humor, and this cat falls flat. Well, I'm sure nostalgia has a lot to do with this one as well, because I did see this one in theaters. My Nan and Papa took me to see this one. I still find this movie pretty funny. I still think that Mike Myers delivers a really funny performance. Some pretty funny one-liners as the cat. There's actually a lot in this movie that I find very quotable that I still quote to this day. And while I can see why some would not like this, and it's definitely not a good movie, I still enjoy putting it on from time to time. Up next, we've got Baywatch with Dwayne Johnson and Zac Efron. It sits at a 17% critically on Rotten Tomatoes with a 60% audience score. The critics said that Baywatch takes its source material's jiggle factor to R-rated levels, but lacks the original's campy charm, and leaves its charming stars flailing in the shallows. Look, I'm not going to sit here and say that this movie is high art or that it's even that great, but I will say that I had a good time watching Baywatch when I first watched it. Dwayne Johnson and Zac Efron's rivalry and chemistry I thought was really good. Zac Efron, I think, gives a really funny comedic performance in the movie. Some of the jokes really do hit for me. A lot of them do fall flat as well, but honestly, I do not hate watching Baywatch. Next up, we've got Spaceballs with a 57% on Rotten Tomatoes from the critics and an 83% audience score. The critics said there's fine spoofery and amusing characters in Spaceballs, though it's a far cry from Mel Brooks' peak era. Look, maybe it has to do with the fact that I haven't seen too many Mel Brooks movies, to be honest with you, but I love Spaceballs. I think Spaceballs is a really funny spoof movie, not just of Star Wars and Star Trek, but of the sci-fi movies around that era. And aside from the clever jokes, the fourth wall breaking, and of course the spoofery of those movies, I really like the characters in Spaceballs. John Candy as Barf, Bill Pullman as Lone Star, Daphne Zuniga as Princess Vespa, the voice of Joan Rivers doing the droid in this movie, and of course Rick Moranis as Dark Helmet. This cast comes together to bring together a really funny comedic movie that I honestly just love. Next up is White Chicks with a 15% on Rotten Tomatoes from the critics and 55% on the audience score. The critics said this was scattershot comedy that's silly and obvious. And they are completely right about this, but I've got two words for the critics that they missed out on. Terry Crews.
And I need you, and I miss you, and now I wonder if I could fall.
I had a blast watching White Chicks. Some of the humor is silly and some of it is very obvious, but that doesn't change the fact that it really tickled my funny bone in a lot of ways. And Terry Crews, thank you so much for doing this movie, man. You really made it worthwhile. Shallow Hal is a movie you probably wouldn't make today. It probably wouldn't go over well if you did make it today anyways. It's got a 50% on Rotten Tomatoes from the critics, 45% of the audience score. The critics said that while this was surprisingly sweeter and warm-hearted than the previous Farley outing, Shallow Hal is also less funny and more bland. But I think that Gwyneth Paltrow and Jack Black are really good in this movie. I think there's a lot of really funny humor. Even if some of it today, it would definitely not pass because it's totally body shaming, especially from Jason Alexander's character.
Oh, there she is. There's Rosemary.
Where?
Right there.
Is she behind the rhino?
But the sweetness of the end does work for me. There are some gags in this movie that I do think are just hilarious. And the fact that some of it is so blatantly cruel for some reason really hits me. I think it's really funny. Following that, we've got The Fanatic with 14% from the critics on Rotten Tomatoes and 30% from the audience score. The critics said that John Travolta gives it his oddly all, but The Fanatic rings hollow as an examination of the way fan appreciation can curdle into toxic obsession. Look, this movie is bad, and what the critics have just said there is completely true, but man, do I enjoy this movie. I think this movie is so hilarious, especially with John Travolta's performance as this obsessed fan. He just goes nuts with this thing. It doesn't even feel like John Travolta. You sometimes marvel at the screen at what John Travolta is doing in this movie, and it just cracks my brain up. And with an absurdly violent ending to this movie that comes out of nowhere, The Fanatic is a horribly good time to me.
I wish that Freddy Krueger would come and chop off your head, and it would roll in the street, and a truck would squish it, and the blood would splatter everywhere, and everyone would watch it.
Up next, we've got my guy Michael J. Fox with Teen Wolf, sitting at a 42% from the critics on Rotten Tomatoes and a 52% audience score. The critics said that though Michael J. Fox is as charismatic as ever, Teen Wolf's coming-of-age themes can't help but feel a little stale and formulaic. Look, this is a movie where Michael J. Fox turns into a werewolf who is suddenly really good at high school basketball. No, it's not good, but I really do enjoy this movie because of Michael J. Fox. Like the critics said, he does give a very charismatic performance in this movie. He definitely carries this entire movie on his shoulders. He makes it the entertaining time that I find it to be. And because of him, he makes the movie work for me. I really like Teen Wolf. Rounding out the final three for today, we're coming in with superhero movies, sitting at a 16% from the critics on Rotten Tomatoes, a 32% for the audience score. The critics said that superhero movie is not the worst of the spoof genre, but relies on tired gags and lame pulp culture references all the same. And this movie came out when the spoof genre was really struggling at the box office. But it also came out when I was 8 years old, and it hit at the perfect moment for me. You got Drake Bell in this movie coming off of his fame from Drake and Josh, a show that I absolutely adored. You've got spoofs from superhero movies that I was watching as a kid around that time, especially the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films, which was the format from which this movie's story is told from. You've also got the Tim Story's Fantastic Four in there. You've got the X-Men in there. Does every joke land? No. Does the movie look super cheap? Absolutely. But the jokes and the gags that do work for me really work for me, and I just really enjoy watching superhero movies, especially nowadays. It takes me back to a time of what superhero movies were before the whole cinematic universe stuff. Our runner-up for today is going to be Weekend at Bernie's, sitting at a 54% from the critics on Rotten Tomatoes and a 57% for the audience score. The critics said that Weekend at Bernie's wrings a surprising amount of laughs out of its corpse-driven slapstick premise, but one joke can only carry a movie so far. Well, that one joke carried the movie from beginning to end for me. Yes, this movie makes no sense. From the minute the guy dies, he should smell so bad by like the third day these guys are carrying his body around. But I really enjoy the performances from Andrew McCarthy and Jonathan Silverman as Richard and Larry in this movie. They kind of have the same energy as a Ross and Chandler from Friends for me. I do find a lot of the gags in this movie super funny. I do find the whole premise absurd. But the movie just has so much fun with it, and the two leads are so entertaining for me to watch that I just really love Weekend at Bernie's.
It's just Bernie!
And finally, the last guilty pleasure we're going to talk about on the video today is Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, sitting at a 56% on Rotten Tomatoes from the critics and a 56% on the audience score. The critics said that Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey has the same stars and cheerfully wacky sense of humor as its predecessor, but they prove a far less effective combination the second time around. I completely disagree with the critics on that last part of their consensus. Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey to me is even better than its predecessor, and the reason why it's better than its predecessor is because it's so wackier and sillier. You've got the most joyous, optimistic characters in all of cinema, and you put them in a situation where they die, they go to heaven and hell, and they can find the fun and the joy in both realms. The set and production design of this movie I think is great, especially the hell sequences. Add in there an evil robot Ted, an evil robot Bill, and William Sadler making his debut as the character Death. And you've got a movie where I love the characters, I love the story, I love the humor. I just love Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. Station! And with that, guys, those are some of my biggest guilty pleasure movies. I could easily make another top 10 list of this if I wanted to. So if you guys want to see a part 2 to this video, comment down below and let me know. Also, while you're down there, I want to hear your guilty pleasure movies as well. Do you agree with me with these guilty pleasure movies, or do you just think some of these are legitimately good movies? Comment down below and let me know. Also, if you're new here and you haven't heard, we have a goal on this channel. We want to hit 2,500 subscribers before the end of the year. If you like talking movies, if you like talking about guilty pleasure movies and movie news and all that good stuff, why don't you consider hitting the subscribe button and becoming a part of our little community over here? We'd love to have you join us. As always, guys, thank you so much for hearing me out, and I hope to talk to you guys again real soon.